Hi everyone, my name is Natasha Vasilyeva. You're on my YouTube channel where we talk about immigration alongside with other social and geopolitical issues. Today I have an interview with Kara, who works in the nonprofit organization called Upwardly Global. Upwardly Global's mission is to help new immigrants get back to their professional careers in the US. And they do it for free for people. I was a client myself. I think the organization is amazing. And we talked with Kara today about her work in Upwardly Global, together with her background and many other nonprofit organizations where she worked and helped people. And we also talked a bit about war in Ukraine and refugees that come to the US and challenges that they face here, together with challenges that other immigrants also face here. I'm happy to start and introduce Kara to you. Hi, Kara. Nice to meet you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you were born, raised, where you studied, and what you were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Colorado originally. I grew up in Denver. I got a bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado in Boulder, which is right outside of Denver. So I lived in Colorado for most of my life until I graduated from college. And when I was younger, I really loved reading. I read constantly as a kid. I always liked word games. I liked doing, like when I was a kid, I liked playing Boggle and Scrabble and all those kinds of games where you spell words and play word games. And I still really like that. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day. And yeah, I've always been interested in language and learning languages. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And so you studied languages in the university, right? And you studied Russian together with English, right?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I got a bachelor's degree in English literature and Russian studies. So I did a double major, and I was interested in Russian when I was in high school. I started reading a lot of kind of classic Russian literature, and especially Dostoevsky. I was really like Dostoevsky, and so I started studying Russian. Yeah, largely out of an interest in the literature and thinking that maybe at some point I would be able to read those books in the original language, which I have to say, after at 12 years after I started studying Russian, I really cannot read most of those books in Russian. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that. It's very challenging for me. I can read short stories in Russian, but I don't know if I'm ever going to read one of those big novels in Russian. Yeah, so I started taking Russian classes in university, and I just got interested, and I took literature classes, history classes, just was very interested in the history and the culture, and kind of became, when I started out, I was really interested in 19th century Russia and the great literature of that era, but I got very interested also in the history of the Cold War era and that kind of encounter between Russia and the US. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, you said that it's still hard to read like long Russian novels in Russian.
Yeah, very hard for me. I try to read a lot in Russian, and now I'm learning Ukrainian as well. And I try to read in both languages. I read the news, I read the BBC in Russian and Ukrainian, and that kind of stuff, nonfiction, factual stuff, history, I can read, but literature is really challenging for me. I think it's just the vocabulary is so broad, and you have to have a good understanding of like what each word means in a very subtle way, and it's very hard for me. I don't know if I'll ever get that good at either language.
No, that's very much true. I wanted to say that it's hard even for me as a
Yeah,
native
yeah.
because they have this like long sentences, and I remember it was a torture, like
Yes.
literature lessons. But that's great. Wow, you do read news in original in Ukrainian and Russian. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I try. I use the dictionary, but do okay.
Of course. And then you worked in Bishkek, right, for a while.
Yes, yeah. So I was an English teacher in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. So when I graduated from college, having studied Russian for a couple of years, I had spent a little bit of time in Russia in college. I had spent a little bit of time in St. Petersburg, and I wanted to improve my Russian. I wanted to really get fluent. So I wanted to go somewhere where I could speak Russian, in my daily life. And so I got certified to teach English. I applied for jobs in Russia and then in other Russian speaking countries. So, across the former Soviet Union. And I found a job in Kyrgyzstan. And I really didn't know anything about Kyrgyzstan at the time that I applied for that job. I ended up spending about 10 months in Bishkek, and I loved it. Kyrgyzstan is an incredibly beautiful country. I really had not known anything about it before I went there, but it has beautiful mountains. It has the biggest alpine lake in Asia, Issyk-Kul, in the mountains in Kyrgyzstan. It's incredibly beautiful, and yeah, I had a really really great time there.
Cool. So you spent 10 months there, but then you came back and switched to a career coach, right?
Yes, yes.
How did it happen? Why did you decide to go into career coaching, like from teaching?
Yeah. So when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I never really planned to be a teacher for a long time. Teaching English was kind of a way to travel and a way to live abroad. And I did like working as a teacher. I liked my job in Kyrgyzstan. I liked the students that I worked with. But I found classroom teaching really hard. It's just, it's like 8 hours a day of talking to a lot of people, having to be, very prepared for all kinds of different challenges. People come to you with all kinds of problems. You have students who are mad at you. You have students who are having all kinds of issues. And it was pretty exhausting. And I felt like I liked it. I liked the experience, but I didn't want to do it forever. And so when I came back to the US, I applied for this program called the Episcopal Service Corps, which, if you're familiar with AmeriCorps, it's a similar kind of program. It's a program where you get placed in pretty low paid, kind of volunteer, socially useful work for a year. And, as you can probably tell from the name, it's affiliated with the Episcopal Church. So I did the Episcopal Service Corps. That was how I ended up moving to Chicago, which is where I am now. I did the Episcopal Service Corps in Chicago. And I worked at an organization called St. Leonard's Ministries, which is on the west side of Chicago. And it is an organization that serves people who are coming out of prison. And so my work there was as a job developer for the participants in that program. And I liked the job development work. I was interested in that role because I felt like I didn't want to be a classroom teacher, but I liked being something like a tutor or a coach, working with people one on one, understanding their specific needs, helping them with, what they particularly wanted to do. And that was easier and more fun and a better fit for me than classroom teaching. So I ended up working at St. Leonard's Ministries for a year as a job coach.
I see. Okay, wow. Previously incarcerated people.
Mm-hmm.
S- Tell us a little bit about how you worked with them, like which issues you helped them with, like what was the hardest in this work?
Yeah. So the place where I worked, it was attached to essentially a shelter, a homeless shelter for people who were coming out of prison. So, I mean, it was people who were right out of prison. They would get on a bus and they'd be taken to this shelter. And they lived there for anywhere from a couple of months to some people lived there for several years. They had kind of a program of progressive assistance where at first you were just living in the shelter, all of your meals were provided, you were sharing a big dormitory room with a lot of other people. And then over time, you could move into like supportive housing. So you could move into smaller apartments where the rent was partially subsidized. And some people stayed there for a period of a couple of years, kind of slowly getting back on their feet. And so I worked in the job development center. So I helped people write resumes. I helped people prepare for interviews. We did a basic job skills class that everybody coming in had to do. And it covered things like, thinking about your skills, writing your resume, and also just kind of like basic professional conduct, how to act in a workplace, how to resolve conflict. A big thing that we talked about was time management, which was really important for the people that we worked with, because if you think about somebody who's been in prison for a couple of years, they have no control over their time during that period. They have someone coming telling them when to wake up, when to go to lunch, when to go to work. And so when they come out and they're responsible for their own schedule, it's a hard skill to learn. So we did a lot of work on like how to manage a calendar, how to remember when you have an appointment, even just like setting an alarm clock, things like that were skills that we had to work on. And we also did there are a couple of programs in Chicago. I actually don't know if this is still the case, but there was a program at that time where people with criminal records could be hired to clean the CTA, the public transportation system. There was kind of a specific jobs program at the CTA. So we helped a lot of people get into that program. But yeah, I worked with a wide variety of people going into a lot of different kinds of jobs, going into food service, going into manufacturing. Lots of different kinds of jobs.
And by the way, how does it work in the US? Did you have a list of employers that were willing to take those previously incarcerated people? And is it illegal to discriminate against like previous prison conviction, or like how does it work?
So legally, that's a really good question. And I don't feel totally confident giving an answer just because it's been a long time since I did this. This was about 10 years ago. But my understanding is, I believe in Chicago, and I think in some other places in the US, it's illegal to just straightforwardly ask someone on the job application, like, do you have any criminal convictions? So they can't say, we won't take anyone with any kind of criminal conviction. But most employers will do a background check. And if there's a criminal conviction that's related to anything that has to do with their business, they're pretty unlikely to hire you. So things like, if you have a conviction that's related to theft, you're probably not getting a retail job. If you have any kind of violent conviction, it can be very difficult to get a job in anything that's like public facing. And of course, there are a lot of things like, you can't work in a school if you have any kind of violent conviction, public safety, things like that. So it varies a lot depending on kind of conviction that you have. I worked with a lot of people who had drug-related convictions, and most employers are at least willing to consider somebody who has a drug-related conviction, especially if they, have a documentation of having been sober for some time.
All right. And then from there you switched to a community center, right?
Yeah. So I worked at St. Leonard's Ministries for 1 year, and that was it was a fixed period of time. It was an internship. And then after that, I worked at a community college in Chicago for about a year and a half as a reading tutor. And then I worked at a community center on the far north side of Chicago, a neighborhood called Rogers Park, which I lived in for a long time. And I did kind of two things there. I taught a GED class. So if you don't know, GED is the high school equivalency. So if you didn't graduate from high school, you can go back and take GED courses, and you can take this GED exam. And if you pass the exam, it is equivalent to having a high school diploma. So I taught GED classes at Howard Area Community Center in Rogers Park, Chicago. And then I also did job placement for the GED students. So kind of a mix of both of my previous professions.
And you were working only with adults there, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was all adults.
And how did you do placements for them? Did you also had some like list of employers that you worked with, or you just like helped them with resumes and stuff?
We had a few employers that we worked with, but mostly people would look for they would look for job openings independently, or I would help them look for job openings. And then I would do things like help them write resumes and help them prepare for interviews. It was a lot of resume writing. I think that was the hardest thing for most people, is just getting together a resume.
Right. And you worked with both like natives and immigrants, right?
Yes, yeah. So the class that I taught there was a mix of American English speaking students and ESL, meaning English as a second language, immigrant and refugee students. The neighborhood that I worked in, Rogers Park, is one of the zip codes in the United States that has like the highest concentration of immigrants and refugees. It's an incredibly, incredibly diverse area. So I worked with a lot of Latin Americans, a lot of people from West Africa, a lot of people from, gosh, all over the place, South Asia, a lot of Indian and Pakistani students. Yeah, all over the world, really.
I see. And was it different, like how you worked with natives and with immigrants, except for like teaching immigrants language? Like, were there any other differences?
Yeah, it definitely was challenging because having native born and foreign born students in the classroom together, they can be testing at a really similar level, but have really different needs. So a lot of the native English speaking students that I worked with, their big problem was reading comprehension. It was reading a complex text and understanding like what are the opinions being expressed in this text, like how is the author using tone, if the author is making a joke, or if they're saying something, if they're setting up an argument in order to argue against it, how do you understand those things? But really, with a lot of the foreign born students that I was working with, the only thing they really needed was vocabulary. Many of them were, very, very sophisticated. Some of them, had graduate degrees in their home countries. I worked with a man who had been a professor of biology in, I think, Cameroon, if I remember correctly, for like 30 years. And so all they really needed was grammar and vocabulary. So it definitely was, it was a really big challenge to teach, native English speaking and foreign born students together. But it was also interesting because you could get really good conversations. You could get people to talk about their different experiences. Part of what I was doing, like to prepare people for the GED, because part of it is a social studies test. So there was a lot of like civics and government content. So we had very, very interesting conversations about the different forms of government that people in the class were familiar with. So it was a challenge for sure, but it was a very interesting group of students, and I really enjoyed working with those people.
Wow. And you said that it was high school level exams, right? And
Yes.
on the other hand, immigrants, you said that some of them were very sophisticated and had graduate degrees. Why would they take this course then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for a lot of them, they didn't actually intend to take the GED. They didn't need the GED test. For most of them, I think it was an advanced English course. So maybe they had, because we did also offer ESL courses at that institution. But for some people who had gone through the highest level of ESL course, but they still just wanted a lot of practice speaking English, the GED class was a way for them to get that.
I see. Makes sense. And how did you switch to Upwardly Global?
So, when I was working at my previous job at Howard Area Community Center, I learned about Upwardly Global because I was looking up resources for some of the students who did have professional backgrounds, and I referred a couple of students to Upwardly Global. So, Upwardly Global, our mission is specifically to do job placement with immigrants and refugees who have professional backgrounds. So, for example, I mentioned that student that I worked with who had been a biology professor. So, for him, Upwardly Global was a good resource because they were able to meet him at his level. They understood that he didn't have, he needed a little more English fluency. He needed a little more time to adapt to the U.S., but that his skills and his education were really, really high. So I became aware of Upwardly Global when I worked at Howard Area Community Center. And then a couple years ago, end of 2021, I saw that there was a job opening, and yeah, I was interested. I was, at that point, I had gone back to, teaching in the classroom part of my day. So I was doing half a day of teaching and half a day of job placement. And again, I was burning out a little bit on being in the classroom and thought that doing full-time job placement seemed appealing, and it seemed like a great organization.
Cool. And yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more about Upwardly Global, because I'm personally constantly promoting you because I love this organization. I was a client myself when we just came
Oh,
3 years
that's great.
ago. Yeah, so that's how, like, my friend just randomly told me about Upwardly Global, and at first I was like thinking, okay, that's another organization that helps. Like, I'm not sure if they help or not, but I decided to try. And yeah, like, I was able to get my job with Amazon thanks to your courses, and I was just like amazed. I was astounded by like the quality of work you do, and since then I'm a volunteer and constant promoter. But yeah, like tell a little bit about your mission, about what you do, like who is applicable, like what people need to qualify for the program. And by the way, it's like free. It's free for everyone who qualifies.
It is. Yeah, it's free for everybody who qualifies. So our mission is to work with immigrants and refugees who have a professional background and to help them find job placements that match their background and their skills. So the kind of backstory behind Upwardly Global is that the founder of Upwardly Global, her name is Jane Liu, and she was touring a chicken factory, like a chicken processing plant. And she met someone at the chicken processing plant who was, I believe he was a medical doctor, and I think he was from Bosnia. And he was working in this job that was very physically difficult, very low paid. I mean, those chicken processing plants, it's important work, obviously, but it's a brutal lifestyle and the pay is not very good. And so, her mission was to reach people like that who have the qualifications, who have the skills to quickly move into a job that offers a much higher quality of life, and to try to put them on that pathway. So we offer job coaching. So I'm a job coach, and my whole day is spent talking with job seekers, doing things like helping them write resumes, helping them prepare for interviews, helping them learn to navigate LinkedIn and other job search sites, helping them network and meet other people in their field so that they can make connections that help them find jobs. So we offer job coaching. We offer connections with a small list of employer partners. So we have a few partners that we have ongoing relationships with, and we can refer job seekers to those partners. We offer events. We offer networking with volunteers. So you're a volunteer. I know that you've done informational interviews with a few of the job seekers that I work with. So we offer things like that, connections with people who are already in the workforce. And yeah, it is all completely free. It's all funded by government grants and by private foundation grants and by grants from the like charitable and nonprofit arms of private corporations. We can work with anybody who has a professional background. So typically that means somebody with at least a couple of years of professional work experience. However, we can also sometimes work with people who have a bachelor's degree but no work experience yet. And basically a couple things that you have to be eligible. You have to be relatively new to the United States. I think the cutoff is 7 years. So you have to have arrived in the US within the last 7 years. You do have to be legally authorized to work for any employer in the US. So that means, for example, we cannot work with people who are on student visas, and we also can't work with people who are on like special skills visas that are tied to particular employers. So if you're on the kind of visa that requires sponsorship from a particular employer, we can't work with you. But if you have authorization to work for any employer in the US, we can work with you. And that includes anybody, it includes anyone who has at all who has a green card. It includes anyone who came to the US on family migration. So if you were sponsored by, parent, child, spouse, and you're on that kind of visa, we can work with you. It includes anybody who came to the US on a diversity lottery visa. And it includes refugees, it includes asylees, and that does include anybody who is going through the asylum process right now. So if you have started applying for asylum, even if you're waiting on your employment authorization, we can work with you. So right now, with the evacuation from Afghanistan and with the war in Ukraine, there are a number of statuses that are basically like emergency refuge. So the United for Ukraine visas, special immigration visa, SIV, parolee, TPS, temporary protected status, all of those like short-term humanitarian programs, all of those come with universal work authorization. So we can work with anybody who's on any of those kind of visas.
Cool. And then some level of English is also required, right?
Yes. Yeah, you do have to be able to pass an English test. If you apply and you can't pass the English test, we'll give you some resources to build your English skills, and we'll invite you to apply again in 6 months. So you have to have a good enough level of English to work with us that you can plausibly get through an interview in English, because if you can't, there's not much that we can do with our employer partners. But if someone comes to us and their English is not strong enough, we'll give them some resources, try to help them build that up, and we'll invite them to reapply.
I see. Okay. And you mentioned those people on temporary statuses, right? Temporary protection statuses, including Ukrainians. And as far as I understand, you joined like a little bit before the Ukrainian war started, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, I started here right at the beginning of 2022.
Do you see like the organization changed in any way since that happened? Because like, do you have more and more Ukrainians now, or like?
We definitely do have a lot of Ukrainians. I couldn't give you numbers for the overall organization, but I would say that for me personally, probably close to half of the job seekers I'm working with right now are Ukrainian.
Wow.
Yeah, so a very large number of Ukrainians. And definitely one of the big challenges that a lot of the Ukrainians that we work with have is the fact that employers do not understand their visas. They don't understand these emergency work authorization programs. And unfortunately, we are seeing a fair amount of discrimination against Ukrainian job seekers because of the nature of these visas. Because I think that employers look at the visas and they're like, I don't know what TPS is. I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know if I'm going to have to, fill out sponsorship paperwork for you. I don't know if you're going to lose work authorization in 6 months. And so they see it as risky, and they don't want to extend a chance to these employees, which is really unfortunate because, many of the Ukrainian, the refugees that we're seeing from Ukraine, they're highly educated, they're incredibly skilled, and they would be incredibly valuable to any employer. But we are seeing, unfortunately, a lot of confusion, I think misunderstanding of the visas, and unfortunately, I think also a lot of employers don't actually understand what their obligations are in terms of non-discrimination.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. And like as a volunteer, I also like talk to people who say the same thing to me. And they are not sure, and I am not sure if they are really discriminated against, or like if it's like something else maybe employer lacks in their resume, etc. But yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about what actually employers are asking them about when they ask about their status, right? What is important for employer, like what they really look for, maybe for people not to give too much information to the employer that actually works against them.
Absolutely. So I think that there is a lack of understanding among employers, but the actual letter of the law is that employers are not permitted to discriminate based on the kind of work authorization that an applicant has. So of course, applicants have to be legally authorized to work, and they have to demonstrate that. And we all know, when you get a new job on the first day, you give them your ID, you give them your social security card, you show all the documents that prove that you're authorized to work, right? But employers legally are not permitted to say that they will only accept certain types of work authorization. So for example, they're not entitled to say, we'll only take someone who has a green card. We'll only take someone who has permanent residency. If you have TPS, if you have U4U, United for Ukraine status, if you have refugee status, employers are legally banned from discriminating against you because of that. They are legally required to accept that authorization. Now, that's the law. Obviously, the law and reality are not always exactly the same. So employers often do not understand that that is their obligation. They don't understand that they're doing something illegal when they reject someone for having a work authorization status that they don't know about. And we do have a lot of cases where, I talked to a job seeker and the job seeker says, I spoke to this recruiter. They said that they really liked me. However, they said, I can't hire you until you have a green card. Come back when you have a green card. That statement is open and shut discrimination, totally illegal. But clearly employers don't know that because they're saying it all the time, right? So
Wow.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So there's actually a hotline that job seekers can call, and I share this information all the time. There's a hotline with the U.S. Department of Justice that you can call and report that kind of discrimination. And what happens is that a lawyer from the DOJ will reach out to this company and basically give them an explanation and a clarification of the law. And then if they're getting repeat complaints about a company, they might actually open a legal case. But typically the first thing that they do is not any kind of, legal retaliation or punishment. It's just education on the law, because clearly a lot of employers don't know the law. From the perspective of the job seeker, even if you know that the employer is behaving illegally, it can be really, really hard to push back in an interview because you don't have a lot of power in an interview. A couple things that I would say. One thing that employers are allowed to do is refuse to provide sponsorship. So if you're on a type of visa that requires sponsorship, employers are allowed to say, we don't provide sponsorship, we won't do that paperwork. So one thing that I really, really encourage people to do if they're on one of those visas that employers are often confused about is to make sure to be really explicit that they do not need sponsorship. So if somebody is on, let's say, a U4U visa, they should tell the employer really, really clearly. They should say, I am authorized to work for any employer in the US with this paperwork, and I do not need sponsorship, and I do not expect to need sponsorship in the future. Now, the other thing that comes up sometimes, especially with these various legal statuses that Ukrainian refugees have, is that they're not always sure how long those statuses will be renewed. So like TPS is periodically renewed, and it's basically an assessment that the federal government does that it's still not safe to go back to Ukraine, right? And our expectation is that they'll continue to renew TPS for as long as the war goes on. Obviously, that is subject to all kinds of other factors. I don't want to speculate about what might happen after the election. There are definitely some kind of scary thoughts about that. But if you are a job seeker, if you are on TPS right now, in my opinion, you can say in total good faith, in total honesty, I don't expect to ever need sponsorship. And I think that you should say that in an interview, because I think if employers are afraid that you need sponsorship, in that case, they might choose not to hire you. And the one other thing to know is that if a job requires a security clearance, and that would be any job where you're working with any information that deals at all with the military, that deals with national defense, any kind of sensitive government information, Unfortunately, it is not 100% impossible, but as far as I can tell, incredibly rare to get a security clearance if you are not a US citizen. So generally, we just tell job seekers not to apply for jobs that require a security clearance unless they are US citizens.
And then there is also export control, right? It's something like security clearance or something else?
I actually don't know very much about that. I've only come across that like once or twice. But yes,
Okay.
if you need that export control license, I think that can be very hard to get if you're not a citizen. But I don't know very much about that.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, thanks a lot for explaining it, because like this question comes all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the one thing that I will say for job seekers in that situation is if you feel comfortable, you can say something like, if you're in an interview and the recruiter is asking you what kind of work authorization you have, you could say something like, I don't know if you know this, but it's actually illegal to make a hiring decision on the basis of the type of work authorization. I can tell you that I am fully authorized to work in the US. I'm authorized to work for any employer. I'll be absolutely happy to show you all my work authorization documents, but I don't want to give any more information than that right now because I think it puts us on dicey legal ground. And that is something that a lot of employers will understand because employers do understand that they're vulnerable to, discrimination related lawsuits. And a lot of employers will make an effort not to learn any discriminatory information in an interview. So for example, a lot of employers have a very firm policy that says, we don't ask anything about whether you're married, whether you have children, what religion you are, not even small talk, not even chit chat. We don't want that to come up in an interview because we don't want there to be any question that any discriminatory decision was made. And if they understand that authorization documents are in that same category, good employers, they will actually want to avoid getting that information. They'll want to avoid asking that question. So that's my best advice on that issue. I do understand that it's incredibly intimidating to say something like that in an interview, and not all job seekers will be comfortable. But if they do feel comfortable, that can be effective.
Yeah, right. And I can very much confirm, as an interviewer in Amazon, like we have trainings and these non-discriminatory rules, they like, I don't know, we had 5-hour course on how to do interviews, and
Yes.
like each 10 minutes you are reminded that you can't discriminate against this and that, and you can't ask this and that, etc. So like at least big companies, they are super aware. I don't know how it happens like from recruiter side, because like I am interviewer who participates is like later stages, right? Like when it's phone screen or when it's interview loop already. I don't know how recruiters interview, but I think like if they say so many times it to us, then like recruiters definitely shall be aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that often it's more of a problem in small companies where maybe the person who's hiring you doesn't regularly hire people. Maybe this is a little family company. They've only hired 2 people in the last year. They don't necessarily have the same, really good training that Amazon has.
Yeah, definitely. And then I know that you recommend everyone who has work authorization say it explicitly, even in resume, like in the very top.
Yeah, we do recommend that. And that's something that we've gotten mixed feedback on from recruiters. Some recruiters like to see it. Some recruiters say it's not necessary. We do generally recommend that. We think it's good to just get that question out of the way.
Yeah, makes sense. And what else? Like, yeah, clear with these temporary statuses, but do you have like a list of like, I don't know, top 5 problems that new immigrants face that you help them with when they come to the US? Like, why can't they just like go and find a job themselves?
Yeah. So I would say that the feedback that I get when I talk to job seekers, and this is job seekers from all over the world, from a very wide variety of countries, is that the US job search process is just really complicated compared to their home country. So, for example, things like writing a resume, a lot of people come and they say, I wrote a resume once when I graduated from college and I never looked at it again. I wrote a resume and it was boilerplate. It was fill in the blank, right? But in the US market, writing a resume is it's complicated and it takes some work and it takes even some creativity, I would say, because you want your resume really to be a marketing document. You want it to make you stand out from other applicants. And that requires doing some fairly deep thinking and reflecting on what makes you stand out from other potential hires for this position. What have you done that really showcases your skills? So I would say writing a good resume that matches what hiring managers are looking for in the US market is probably challenge number one. And then also interviewing, same thing. I think that a lot of people are accustomed to interviews that are a little bit of a formality. You talk a little bit about your technical skills, you say how many years of experience you have. But again, in the US market, the interview can be a much more involved process. And employers like to ask complicated questions. They like to get you to tell stories. They're going to try to get a sense of your soft skills, things like, how do you manage stress? How do you deal with communication in the workplace? And to get a sense of that, they ask these storytelling questions where they ask things like, tell about a time when you disagreed with your supervisor. How did you approach it? Did you try to persuade your supervisor of your opinion? And what was the outcome? And that's a fairly complicated question to answer. And a lot of people are not really accustomed to answering that type of question. So yeah, I think being prepared for the resume, being prepared for the interview, and really being prepared to pitch yourself, have a sales pitch for yourself in a very competitive market. And I think that that's something that a lot of job seekers are not really used to. So a lot of what we do is just talking about their backgrounds and their work experience to try to figure out what those things are, to try to say what are your strongest soft skills? I know that I know that you're a coder. I know that you know 4 programming languages, but, are you a leader? Are you persuasive? Are you able to solve problems in the workplace? Are you able to manage under stress? And employers want to know all of those things. So yes, I think that in the US, from what other people have told me, I don't really have non-US experience very much, but in the US, it seems like the whole job search process is much more of there's much more marketing than there is in a lot of countries. You really have to sell yourself. You really have to have a pitch for yourself. And so I think that's the big challenge that we help people with.
Absolutely. And I can tell you about my own experience. One thing is just like the complexity of those questions, as you said. It will require a lot of training because, like, for instance, a lot of questions that I heard in the interviews, I wouldn't be able just answer them from the spot. Like, it will require a lot of reflection, a lot of time spent, like remembering what I did, where I did it, because the questions are very detailed, like very focused on like a specific skill, specific trait, or like specific situation. So yeah, like for instance, like preparing to Amazon interviews, I had like around 40 examples from my previous work experience, like written down, and it took weeks, like to just like come up with them and come up with the level of details required, like to those questions. But also about like marketing, what you say, like marketing pitch. At least in my culture, I'm originally Russian, and I worked in Lithuania for 7 years in East Europe. And I think in both cultures, like in Russia and Lithuania, people are not taught to speak about themselves that much. Because what you said when you worked in a community college, like helping people do this like high school level reading exams, like it feels to me that at least like my native part of the world, like former Soviet Union countries, there is a lot of focus in education on like technical subjects such as math, physics, etc., but much less focus on like people's ability to express their thoughts in a precise, logical way. So we were not writing that many essays, we were not doing that many presentations at school, and etc. And yeah, like I think many people just feel awkward that they have to come and present themselves so much.
Absolutely. And I think also for a lot of immigrants, depending on the culture that they come from, I think that for a lot of people, it's incredibly uncomfortable actually to go into a job interview and to be put in the position of having to say, I'm really good at this. This is my strength. Because I think for a lot of people, that feels rude and it feels almost off putting. And, and of course, even in American culture, there are taboos against bragging or talking about yourself too much. But really in the interview, you have to brag a little bit. You have to talk about yourself. And so that's one of the challenges.
Right. And how do you help them with those interviews? Like, do you do mocks with them?
Yeah, we do a lot of mock interviews, do a lot of practice interviews. And then this is also something that we use volunteers for, which I think that you've done this. So we connect job seekers with volunteers, especially volunteers who are in the professional area or the sector that they want to go into, and they can practice interviewing there. We also sometimes have events with some of our employer partners that are like mock interview events. So we'll have, for example, Accenture is one of our employer partners. We've had events with Accenture where they send a bunch of Accenture people and they do mock interviews with the Upwardly Global candidates. So yeah, we try to give people a lot of interviewing practice because that is definitely a challenge.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I do feel that mock is something that really helps people because companies they rarely do feedback, right? They reject and that's it. They don't say why.
Yeah, and it's something that, most people don't get a lot of practice with interviewing. So yeah, I think the mock interviews are a very, very important part of our program.
Right. And I think I heard that you also do skill training, right? Like if people lack some skill.
We do a little bit of skill training. In terms of skill training, do you mean like technical skills for jobs?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we do a little bit of that. It's definitely not the main thing that we do. And in general, we don't want people to come to Upwardly Global with the goal of learning a new career. So if your background is, in law and you want to become a software engineer, there are resources out there. There are free coding classes. There are nonprofits that do upskilling. That's not really our main focus.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal, our mission is to help people find a job in the area where they already have some professional experience or some professional training. That said, we do offer some upskilling. And one thing that we offer all of our job seekers is a free subscription to Coursera, which is a platform of massive open online courses. So they're pre-recorded video courses. You can take them at any time on your own schedule. So they're very convenient for, people who are raising kids or people who are working survival jobs. And Coursera is a really, really wonderful resource. It has all kinds of stuff. It has a lot of English courses. It has English for various technical areas. I work mostly with tech job seekers, IT job seekers, and Coursera does have any programming language that you want to learn is on Coursera. Any kind of technical skill that you want to learn is on Coursera. So we do offer that, but I would definitely want to be clear for anybody who's considering enrolling at Upwardly Global. It's not our mission is not to train you for a new career.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So it's just like if the person is already in this profession and just lack one like minor skill.
Exactly. Or maybe if they've been out of the workforce for a couple of years and they need to refresh their knowledge. That's something that we can help them with.
Makes sense. And by the way, I did not know that you specialize. So, like, Offer the Global coaches work with a specific industries, right?
Yeah, so we have 5 working groups. We call them communities of practice, and each working group is focused on a specific job area. So I work with the IT community of practice. So I work with job seekers across various technical fields. So software engineers, quality assurance engineers, cybersecurity analysts, data analysts, data scientists, and engineers, network administrators, infrastructure, hardware engineers, basically anything dealing with hardware or software. And then there are also communities of practice focused on medical careers, finance and accounting, engineering, and then business and operations. And then we also have an additional working group that's called special tracks. And that just means anything that's not in one of those 5 categories. So the special tracks group works with people in education, people with legal backgrounds, people with journalism, creative, media, basically anything professional that doesn't fall into one of those 5 original groups that I said.
Cool. Okay. Great to know. And maybe you can tell a little bit about you, like, what drives you in this work? Like, what do you feel passionate about? What's your favorite part of it?
Yeah. Well, I can say that one thing about this work is that when it's successful, it's just incredibly fulfilling. So I have some job seekers who have, you know, gotten gotten job placements that are just great for them, that really fit their skills, that really help them do what they want to do. And of course, it's incredibly satisfying when I'm working with a job seeker who's, driving for Uber, doing DoorDash, a survival job, and then they get a professional job and suddenly they're making $90,000 a year. I mean, it's so heartening to see that. It's so heartening to see those success stories. I really enjoy the job seekers that I work with. I think that the people that I meet in this job are, incredibly dedicated. They're really talented. They have such diverse life experience. I really enjoy working with them. Of course, the flip side of it's incredibly satisfying when it's successful is that it's also very frustrating when it's unsuccessful. We're coming off of a pretty hard year in the tech job market. And so I think a lot of our job seekers have had a pretty difficult year, and that can be disheartening and frustrating, but I also think it's turning around. And yeah, I really, really like what I do here. It's fun to meet all of these people, and it's really, really satisfying when we're able to make a positive difference for people.
Yeah, makes sense. I completely empathize with that. As a volunteer, I also like I'm so happy when like somebody finds a job. It's like it's really like a celebration, like for me as well. Yeah, by the way, do you have statistics, like any type of statistics of like how many people really get the jobs, like how fast they get them, etc.?
So I do not know those numbers offhand, but I could definitely, I can send you some information. We compile a big like pamphlet of statistics annually, and I could definitely share that with you, but I don't know any numbers totally off the top of my head.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. I'll add them here so people can see. That's great. And last question that I have, who can become a volunteer for you?
Yeah, great question. So anybody can become a volunteer as long as you have, I think it is 2 to 3 years of professional experience. So as long as you are working in a professional area and, we don't usually have people as volunteers who are like brand new to their field, because it's more helpful if they've been in the field for a couple of years, have some connections, and have some experience of the field to share. But yeah, anybody who has been working in a professional capacity for 2 to 3 years is welcome to apply to volunteer. And anyone who's interested in volunteering, you can go to our website, which is just upwardlyglobal.org, and you'll see on that website a tab that says Get Involved. And if you click that, it will take you to the application to volunteer. We love having people volunteer. Our volunteers are incredibly valuable. One of the things that we like to offer to job seekers is the opportunity to network, because somebody who's coming here from another country doesn't have, just doesn't have an organic network. So we want them to connect with people. So volunteers are really, really valuable for that. We have volunteers do mock interviews. We have volunteers lead some of our events, and we could not do what we do without volunteers. So we're hugely, hugely appreciative of anybody who wants to volunteer.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Is there anything you wanted to share that I did not ask you?
Nothing really that comes to mind. I think we kind of talked about a lot of aspects of what we do here. How long have you been volunteering for Upwardly Global, by the way?
Like almost 3 years now. We came in July 2021, and we were so lucky with my husband. Like we both found our first jobs like in a month, I think, of actively looking for jobs. And I think it was like a mixture of one thing, like the market was booming back then. It was better than it is now. It was insane. It was not something that we expected because we came from Europe. We came from Lithuania when everybody was in COVID mode. Nobody was hiring back then. And we were so worried coming here. We heard that it's better in the US than in Europe, but we were shocked like by the amount of job ads and by shortages that were like everywhere. And another thing, yeah, like we were lucky to find you because we had like experience, and also like I worked with British hedge funds before that for like 6.5 years, and my previous boss was also like from America. He studied here and he worked in America like for 10 years, so we kind of had American work style. So I was a little bit familiar with the culture just from working with him, but I was not looking for a job like for 7 years before that. I did not have updated resume. I was not prepared to interviewing at all because like my last like 6.5 years was like just working with the same people in different companies where like you just know someone, they know you, and they just like ask you to come and to work with them like in a different project or something. And there is like no interviewing. So mocks, like you say about mock, like wow, this was something that I was shocked that you provide for free. And, like it was funny, like my own experience. I did the courses, like the resume training courses by Upwardly Global. I wrote my resume and I got my first interview quite fast after I just finished the course. And I did not even have a mentor assigned to me back then, a coach. And I got my first interview like in a few days. And I
Oh,
was
wow.
so scared. Like I thought like, oh my God, I definitely fail it because I just came. I have no examples. I haven't done anything. I just wrote my resume. And I wrote to Upwardly Global saying like, I have an interview in 3 days. What shall I do? And I was shocked. Like I was assigned a mentor that exact evening. And I had my mock interview like in the next or like the following day, when like I tried to prepare as much as I could by then. But then I got awesome feedback. Like I was able to tell a few stories, and I didn't know about the structure. I just learned about this power structure. And yeah, I definitely did very badly, but I got awesome feedback, and I actually got that interview. Like I was not rejected. So, and yeah, I don't know, like I think I would not do it without Upwardly Global because I just would not have like the tools to prepare. So yeah.
Well, that's great. That's such a great success story. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, it was, and it was so unexpected. So yeah, after that, I got two offers, like one from Amazon, another one from another company, and this is not what I expected when we came to the US. Like me and my husband, we thought, okay, like at least half a year on survival jobs. That's what we are going to experience here. So yeah, like once I got my offer, I became a volunteer the next day.
Well, that's great. That's so great. I just love hearing success stories like that.
All right. Thank you so much to talking to me. If people ask questions in the comments, I will definitely ask you to help. But
Absolutely.
thanks a lot. Your story is amazing. Just like the help that you did to people like throughout the whole of your career is just astounding. And for the global mission, yeah, like I am constant supporter.
Well, thank you so much. And, we really appreciate you as a volunteer. Thank you so much for giving your time because we could not do what we do without volunteers. It's so, so valuable and so, so appreciated.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for being with me and Kara. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please share your thoughts, feelings, your own stories in the comments below. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We will be more than happy to answer. If you like this channel, if you like the interview, please press likes, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in future videos. Thank you so much. Bye.